Hi, welcome to another edition of 1 in 15. As ever, I'm going to get my guests to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Andy. My name is Craike. So I'm a leadership coach, facilitator and games designer. And really, if I was to sum up what I do, I help people to get a better understanding of themselves, get a better understanding of the people they work with, and find ways to adapt slightly, use their strengths to perform as best as they can.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thanks, John. I'm really excited to have you along today. As you know, I've been talking to people about what their one big thing that's dominating their thinking is, personally or professionally at the moment. Tell me yours.
Okay, so the big thing for me at the moment is about the transition back to some sort of normality following following lockdown, following COVID-19. And the big thing for me is really about how businesses are going about doing that. So I'm thinking about businesses in particular, because I think there's a risk that they might kind of just do an elastic band, snap back into position. Right, well, you know, we're able to go back to the office now, so everyone's back to the office, that kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few risks for organisations and for people that work for them that we do just kind of try and snap back into something that was resembling the normal we had before.
Yeah, I get that. I'm sure that's a big issue for a lot of people in different contexts, that kind of pressure to go back to something that felt normal, that felt usual, and of course to embrace and engage with it in ways that we always did before. You said that's a risk. Why is that kind of snap back effect that you talked about a risk in particular?
Well, I think that all of our thinking we had before COVID-19 is now out of date.
Sure.
So everything we thought about flexible working, about people's mental health, about how people connect as teams, about the programs even that organizations are working, it's all completely out of date now.
Sure.
And organizations that don't really try and adapt and think about what is the longer term impact of this. You know, we've had this 3-4 month period where we had a few days to suddenly go, you know, what do we do? We've got to do some sort of emergency changes. Now we're going into this longer term period where this is our new normal. You know, we're not going back to what it was before.
Yeah.
So I strongly feel that organizations need to really think about what are the longer term impacts on people of not seeing each other. What are the longer term impacts of insisting that people come into the office if they've got, you know, they're scared of getting on public transport. You know, there's lots and lots of different avenues that organizations need to think through.
Sure. And of those kind of myriad of risks, as it were, are there any that are kind of emerging as, in your opinion, this is the one that if people don't proactively think about, they're going to miss an opportunity?
So I've spoken to a few businesses recently that have started to think about how they invest money. So how they start using money to train their staff.
Sure.
And I think one of the risks I'm seeing is that organizations are seeing the practical process sort of level of things. Our processes, our programs, those are the things that they need to spend money on at the moment to try and get right. And it's not wrong. You know, it's probably true that organizations do need to get that right and find a long-term solution that's going to work for them. But if that comes at the expense of focusing on individuals, on the people in the organizations, their mental health, how they're connecting with each other, their motivation at work. You know, there's various reports going around at the moment about how people feel about returning to work. I saw some stats the other day that were saying something like 50% of people don't want to go back to the office. You know, something like that. I don't quote me on that, but it feels like if businesses just focus on we've got to get these processes right, we've got to get these programs right, and spend all their money on those kind of things, they're going to miss out on people really understanding themselves, understanding other people, thinking about how they work, looking after themselves. And I think that has some long-term risks for mental health, for people's enjoyment of their job, really, as well.
Yeah. And obviously we're both coaches, so we're a little bit past in this context, but you know, I'm going to assume, which is a very uncoachy thing to do, that that your argument would be, you know, if businesses aren't looking after the individuals and the teams of people and making sure that their mental health and other capacities are looked after, but actually the productivity is going to take a hit anyway. And we understand that businesses, you know, that process driven, procedures driven, but that kind of marrying of the two and allowing each to inform the other is going to be a really important way forward. So have you got any kind of suggestions, or have you seen trajectories that people are taking where you think that's going to start to solve it, or that might mitigate some of the risks that you're talking about?
I think you summed it up really nicely there, Andy. Thank you. So good assumption. Yeah, so all the evidence is pointing towards spending on people's well-being has longer-term impacts on their performance. There was a Deloitte, I think, report recently that said for every £1 that you spend on people's mental fitness, mental well-being, you get £5 back in the business. Yeah, it's some fairly simple equations, and it's often one of the first things that goes. So, you know, we know this as coaches, as facilitators, it's one of the easiest things to cut is, you know, our training budget, or the leadership development program that's got going on, because it feels like it's not the reactive, incredibly important firefighting sort of stuff that's going on. Yeah, and I won't argue that those things are incredibly important. What businesses are missing out on is if they're not prepared to invest something now on the basis that they'll get it back, that will have a longer term impact on them. The quote that always sits in my mind is when you get a flight and they say, if the oxygen masks come down, make sure you put on your own mask before you help other people. I'm seeing teams of managers that are really struggling right now because they've just been absorbing all these challenges, all these, they might not call it mental health challenges, but, you know, there is something in there about that from their teams, and they're just like a sponge taking it on. And unless they have that time to really put on their own oxygen mask, they're not going to be capable of really looking after the people that they're meant to be managing.
Yeah, and I see that too, and I think I'm really interested because whenever we try and fix a problem, we quite often, you know, understandably and not inappropriately, we try and focus on individual parts of it and try and kind of fix them. But some of this stuff for me is, you know, we have to take the meta picture as well. There's something about mental health in there. There's something about well-being, which is different. There's something about mental fitness, which is different again. You know, something about resilience, which is affected and affects the others, but again is quite different. It's really, when you talk about that kind of reactive firefighting thing, as you know, in my last job, I was a mental health first aider for the organisation I worked for. And that was a really privileged position to be in, you know, to be one of the people struggling with various aspects of their life and stresses and so on, could have a safe person. That was a real honour, and one I didn't take lightly. But I was always conscious of the reactive role of that and how that the mental health first aider needed to sit with a kind of corporate culture where well-being was seen as really, really important. Because again, it's one of those things that makes so much sense that we sometimes miss it, that the more people you've got who are mentally and physically fit and capable, the more likely they are to cope with stresses and strains, the more likely they are to get through pressures without having physical or mental health problems. But sometimes the space, the financial space or the other space for it is to do something reactive and feel that we've done it. You know, like a couple of years ago, there was a big thing, wasn't there, with building resilience training in companies. And I had a very mixed kind of mental space about that, because on the one hand, I was super excited that it was happening, and really, really important that people understand some of the tools and techniques of resilience. But I also had this kind of nagging voice at the back of my head, wondering whether companies were going to, mostly subconsciously, but we're going to end up piling more stuff on people because now we've given you the resilience training, you should be able to cope with more, which isn't my understanding of resilience or of being resilient. So what else might we need to, what are some of the pitfalls that companies might fall into if they're not careful?
So I'm trying to think of some of the conversations I've had with businesses recently. I was chatting with someone the other day and they were saying that their business is looking to introduce a new flexible working policy. And what they've done is they've looked at how much people were using working from home days before COVID and based it on that.
Right.
And so they've said, oh, great news, you know, we're going to give everyone 20 days a year flexible working. You can work from home. And it feels like it's missing the point a bit.
Yeah.
It's we can't ignore what's happened in this period, and we can't ignore that everything's going to be different following this period.
Sure.
Similarly, there's an organisation I do some work with who are very proactive. Actually, they're very good at looking after their team. The one thing I'd say is that they definitely seem to have this view that they're waiting for something to return, some face-to-face option. So, you know, they were due to roll out leadership programs to think about having a consistent way of leading within the organisation. And they're very much holding on for this idea that sooner or later we'll be able to do these in person. Don't get me wrong, I love in person. You know, I think it's great. But I just think if the risk is if we just keep holding on, I just think businesses need to talk to their staff, find out what people want, find out what's worked for them during this period, because there's actually lots of things have worked for people. Find out what's been incredibly difficult during this period, and then use that data to revise all of their different ways of working and systems and training budgets and all of these different things. And I think if people don't, if they keep using the data we had before COVID, I think we're going to slip up. I think organisations are going to slip up.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about companies trying to find out from people what's worked, what's been a pressure point, and so on. Because back of my mind, I was thinking of my experience as a youth worker. You know, where we one of the things we always wanted to do was find out what the young people wanted, what they felt they needed. But that was something that you had to hold in a kind of nuanced balance, because often they didn't know, you know, because they didn't know what the possibilities were. They just knew what their lived experience was. And I think that's something that we can translate for businesses and other community groups, is that thing of, well, we need to take the time. And actually that's going to be one of the bigger pressure points, isn't it? Is finding the time, giving ourselves permission to not rush a solution out straight away, particularly if you've got a bigger organization, but to have those conversations with people and say, you know, what has worked for you? What if we did something else that we'd always done before now, how would that have a negative impact on you, as well as how would it have a positive impact on you? But then take that time to kind of properly assess that data and notice that one solution isn't going to fit everyone. And I think that for me, that's the biggest change that we're going to see. I think if companies get it right, and other organisations, is a recognition finally of this truth that we've always known, that one size doesn't fit all, that, you know, that kind of flexible working pattern that you talk about, even that, you know, some people feel it's an imposition, some people don't feel it's enough freedom, you know. So this is a kind of thing, really interesting kind of nuanced set of solutions, I think, is what we're going to have to do. Johnny, we've got a couple more minutes. I think we've talked about some of the intention, you know, of these interviews is to try and show where some of the hope is. We've highlighted some of the pitfalls, and I think we've shown how some of them might be navigated across. Is there anything else that kind of springs to mind? You think this is one, if I was a small business owner, if I run a charity or a community group, what one thing do I need to be thinking about making those decisions going forwards?
This is going to sound like ridiculous salesmanship, I imagine, but I really think people should be talking to coaches and talking to facilitators. If they work with someone, if they've got a relationship with someone, then engage with them. Every coach, every facilitator I know is offering themselves to talk to people for free at the moment, on the basis of you know, let's work out what you need, and I think it's sort of hiding away from it and thinking, well, we can't afford anything, it is not the right thing to do at the moment. What I would suggest is to have the conversation, to find out what's possible, and if you then can't afford something, then that's an informed decision. But yeah, I honestly, I think the overall thing is people need to talk. They need to talk to their experts that they work with. They need to talk to the experts in doing their jobs, the staff, and really find out what's working and what they could do in the future.
That's brilliant. And obviously, as a fellow coach, I can endorse that. There are, you know, we should say there's a number of other ways of getting that kind of information in thing. But the important thing is that, you know, a coach or someone parallel offers you that nobody else does, is that kind of in it but not of it kind of situation where we can be a kind of a sounding board and sometimes notice things that it's hard to notice when you're in the situation. I think for me, the hope is we've got through a significant and seismic change. You know, there's been casualties along the way, to be sure, and I'm not downplaying that. But you know, those who are still around, the organisations that are still around, there's a real sense of creative opportunity for me, perhaps a once in a lifetime, genuinely, to look at things with brand new hope, with a blank sheet of paper, or as close as we're ever going to get. And so much great can come out of that. Johnny, we have run out of time. Thank you so much. It's been fascinating. Like all of these interviews, we've scratched the surface. I want to talk more. I want to do more reflection about it, but our time's up. So Johnny, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy.